there's something about the military that gives you an opportunity to kind of really recreate yourself at that transition point. So if anybody can get some value out of that, it'd be great for me.
All right, welcome everybody once again. We're back and we are here with Mr. Marvin McGuire. He's given us the blessing of his time and to come on the show and discuss some things about retirees, about transitioning through the military, and a couple other fun things that I'm sure we're going to get into during the course of the interview. So welcome to the show, Marvin. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, John. I'm excited to be here.
And we're excited to have you. I'm glad after the many stumbling blocks that we had trying to recalculate and reschedule over the last few weeks, but we finally got it locked in. So I'm glad to have you on, and maybe who knows if we do a part 2 or if we do an additional, that would be awesome too. So what I want to do is just jump in real quick, and if you could give us your 2-minute elevator pitch, like if you had to explain to yourself at a party, somebody asked you what do you do? Could you give us that little insight?
Sure. Well, I spent 21 years of active duty in the Navy. I was a military logistics officer. Been married for almost 31 years now. I'm a father of 4 grown children, happy and healthy. I live in the Tampa Bay area, and I spent post-retirement, transitioning out of the military, I spent 10 years as a federal contractor. And then just recently, about, working close to 18 months ago, I kind of started my own small business with my wife, helping people invest in commercial real estate. And what else would I say? I'm a 3-time brain cancer survivor, so it gives me a pretty unique perspective on life in general. So that's what I would tell people, just kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, that sounds like we may or may not dive down a philosophical rabbit hole. So I'm game for it if you're game for it. We'll see where it goes from there. But thank you for that. So what I want to ask you is where you initially came up with the idea to join the military, where you might have been, place and time, what age you were when you made that decision. What was kind of the trigger point that then allowed you to then enlist into the military?
No, that's a great question. So for me, I grew up in a small town in kind of central Texas, so a long way from any water. And but my father's sister lived on a boat in the Annapolis Harbor, and she was kind of my favorite aunt. So one summer, I went up and spent several weeks living on a boat in Annapolis Harbor, and she just happened to be in the harbor directly across from the United States Naval Academy. And one weekday, she said, they offer these really cool, and I think I was a freshman. I think I was the summer between my freshman and sophomore year in high school. And she said, it'd be really cool. Let's go for a tour. So we spent an entire day at the Naval Academy. And, when you're, call it, 15 years old, and you really have no idea what you want to do with your life or where you want to go and what you want to be when you grow up, you go over there and you have, your eyes get this big and you see this place and it's extremely impressive. And so I kind of caught the fever, then, and went back and said, okay, what do you got to do to go to this place? And really had never heard of it, never considered anything like that. I was going to go to Texas A&M and play baseball, and just started investigating the process. And fortunately for me, I was already a pretty good student and played athletics. And so really kind of buckled down and doubled my efforts and was able to, get an appointment to the Naval Academy in 1988 when I graduated from high school. And then that kind of solidifies your decision, because I think coming out of the Naval Academy, at least at that time, it was a 5-year commitment. And so that's kind of how I made my way into the Navy from a small town in, central Texas.
It's amazing what happens around that 15 to 16 year age range in there, where you're in that middle of high school and middle of teetering on, coming from childhood, going into adulthood. And when you get things like that kind of cross your path. Yeah. We're actually going to revisit that here later in the interview, but I'll get back to that in a minute.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you're just trying to figure out who you are at that point. one thing that can really change the course of your life. So it's pretty amazing.
It is indeed. And I do want to ask, kind of along those same lines, as you went through your military career, I'm sure you developed some sort of routines, whether it be morning routines, evening routines, or a combination of the both, other routines in your life throughout that 20 plus years of military history. Your morning routine specifically, then when you were still, active duty, still in uniform, as compared to once you got out and started to get your stride down in retirement, how does that differ from your active duty military morning routine to say now?
Okay. Well, I mean, for me during my military career, it really differed, kind of in a section in that when I was stationed on, afloat on ships, uh, the day started so early, whether we were in home port or out to sea, that, my morning routines were really just get up and kind of say my prayers and then, try to find something during the day time during the day to exercise, usually at lunch or in the evening after, if we were in port, it was during the lunch break. And then if we were underway out to sea, it was just kind of catch as catch can because it's between watches and meals and meetings and the workday. While we were in port, it was usually, up early, work out, say your prayers or do your devotional, and then off to work. But, when I was stationed ashore, it was kind of the same thing as I was stationed, when the ship was in port, it was up, say your prayers and get a workout in and head to work. Now, after I've transitioned, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. And so I like to, I get up usually about 6:15. I'm not a big runner, so I walk, I go for a 5 mile walk, and during that walk, it's kind of meditative, I'm kind of meditative and say your prayers and, be thankful and be grateful and then get back and have a cup of coffee or two with my wife. And then we like to do, we'll read for 15 or 20 minutes before we start our days. And that just really, so you can get all that done. I've been done with the morning routine it's 9 a.m., 9:10 a.m. here in Florida. And we've been done for close to an hour. So it's easy to get up and get it done and really feel like you get started on a level ground, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have a good semi-similar morning routine. Maybe not the morning walk, but I know about the morning walks, and walking in general is just a very meditative exercise. You had mentioned before we started recording that you just got back from the Appalachian Trail, and I've heard that that's one of the most um, kind of spiritual slash relaxing things that you can do is just get on the trail and just spend 4 or 5 or 10 days walking and just enjoying taking in nature, taking in just the Appalachian Trail itself because it's so vast. Like you don't really, you see it on the map and you hear about it maybe in social studies in school, but when you actually go there and you see it and you start to realize like it starts way down here in the south and it goes all the way up through the northeast, it's kind of interesting. So
Yeah, it's amazing. This is our fourth trip out to do a little section hike. And every time I go out, it reminds me how small we are, and that's kind of fun because you're always, when you're in your routine and you're busy and you're doing life, whether you're a father or a husband or just a businessman or whatever you're doing, you feel, hey, I'm the master of my own domain here. I'm kind of the center of my universe. And you get out there and you're like, I'm pretty helpless. I'm pretty small. And I think it's a really good reset. And it's a physical challenge, and it's beautiful. It's just it's one of my favorite places.
yeah, and if you could, I mean, I know you said you've been out there a few times. Do you have a specific kind of like 10 most important things that you take with you, or maybe even two most important things that you take with you on any of those hikes that you've learned throughout your journeys of going on those hikes and going on those adventures?
Sure. I mean, I think that the lessons that I've learned is, well, people preparation is just absolutely critical. I mean, for example, this trip we went out and we spent the 90 days before we went out really prepping with it's me and 7 of my buddies. And, we track the weather down to the last day and you do a gear shakedown just like you do in the military and you're mapping out waypoints and hey, they've got shelter here, they've got a water here, this is a good camping area, all of the things. And like on the last day, we knew it was going to rain. The forecast was for 55 degrees, but it ended up being 38 degrees and a downpour. So we really didn't plan. I mean, I didn't have a jacket, I didn't have a cold weather jacket. I didn't plan for a 20-degree less. So I would say, preparation is critical and kind of plan for the unexpected. Always plan for the unexpected. So that would be, one major takeaway. And then two, I would say there's a saying on the trails, hike your own hike. And, a lot of people will get out there and they'll get a group and you'll try to be keeping up with the guy who's a jackrabbit. He's moving, he's flying down the trail and you're like, damn, I'm not in that bad of shape. I'm really not. But I can't even come within a quarter mile of this guy. And you get in that trap where you're trying to keep up with the Jones, and what I've learned over these first 4, section hikes and my bucket list is to do them all, to do the whole trail over the course of the next 20 some odd years is just hike your own hike. It's okay if you're last, kind of take time and smell the roses. I'm always last in our group. I'm always the last guy in the camp, but I'm also the guy with the most pictures. And hey, did you see that? Or hey, did you stop and talk to that guy? They were 80 and they were walking here. Or hey, did you stop and talk to that person? He had the greatest story. So I feel like sometimes I'm the last guy in, but I also have the richest experience. So those would be my 2 major takeaways.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's again, it's a very meditative thing to go hiking or walking in general, but taking on something like the Appalachian Trail, or if you go to Europe, there's a bunch of trails here.
Yeah.
There's um, a couple really long hikes that you can go on. They last for like days and potentially months.
Camino something. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. The Camino Trail. Yeah. It's, I would love to do it one day. I don't know if I'll ever get around to it, but that's definitely, it's those kind of things that they're kind of like going through the military, right? You start and you're like, oh, okay, we're going to do the first 3-year stint, and then you re-enlist, and then you re-enlist, and next thing you know, you're 10 years in, and then you're like, oh, I have to decide. And then you get to a point where you're like, okay, cool, I've done 20. Now do I want to continue on more, or do I want to call it quits? And as you mentioned, at least near the end of military service, you get to that point where you start to slow down a little bit. You start to take in a little bit more, take more pictures, interact with people a little bit more, and enjoy the process a little bit more, rather than just kind of speeding through it, because you've already spent through the first 10 or 15 years or whatever of the military, and you get to that point, you're like, oh wow, a lot of time has passed and a lot of things have happened. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, on that note, let me ask you when and where you actually made the decision, or what kind of prompted the decision to say, okay, it's time for me to go ahead and hang up my military uniform and transition to civilian life and do some other things.
I love that question. I get that question a lot. And it was, I spent my last 5 years of active duty at MacDill Air Force Base at Special Operations Command here in Tampa, where I live. And I used to live about an hour north of Tampa. My home was so I had about an hour commute, to work and home every day. So one of my routines in the evening is I'm a relational guy and I like to keep all my relations kind of fresh. So I'm just make phone calls every day. I was like, okay, I'm going to call 1, 2, 3 today and check on them and see how they're doing. And I had a regular Navy buddy that I checked in with, just super good guy. And he retired a couple of years before me, and he kind of retired. He retired right from command. He was a commander, and he was kind of on the fast track, super good guy. And, he retired, and everybody was like, hey man, what are you doing? You just had your 05 command you're hot to try for '06. And he's like, when you know. And so we talk every, probably at least once a week on the way home. And I'm like, dude, what do you, and he'd ask me, hey, what are you thinking? When do you know? And he's like, you're just going to wake up one morning and you're just going to know, hey, I'm done. I'm comfortable in my own skin. I'm comfortable with what have achieved. I don't need to make, the next rank, whether that's, sergeant major or captain or admiral or whatever. And you'll just know I'm done. And that's, for me, that's exactly what happened. I mean, it's just, one day, I was doing good. I had good fitness reports and performance reports. I was selected for command. I was, and it was just like, I'm done. I just knew, you just woke up one morning and you're just like, hey, my family, my kids are settled in a good school. They're happy. My wife is happy. My marriage is in a good place. Yeah, I'm good. We're gonna do this. We're gonna transition. So it really wasn't any epiphany or anything that, never, my detailer or my monitor, didn't say, hey, you're going to Alaska or I'm sending you to the North Pole, or it was nothing like that. It was just, I woke up. I was like, I think I've checked that block. It's time to go on to a new adventure.
Yeah, it's excellent. Yeah, it's definitely different for everybody, and it's one of the purposes of doing this is kind of getting different perspectives on things from different members of the military from all ranks, all services, and trying to gather all that together, and then in the background just kind of keeping a running tally and figuring out like what are some of the similarities, what are some of the differences. But it seems like that question in particular is all over the place for answers.
I'll bet. But what a great mission. I appreciate what you're doing, because I think it's just the information that you're providing in this podcast is, more we can get it out to the veteran community and the military community that are, in the process of making that really difficult. It's a difficult decision. I mean, you're talking about your life and your family's life and all of that. I mean, I just think that, I commend you, because more information we can share that will help people make the right decision for themselves, the better. So, bravo Zulu to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate your kind words. I want to ask just kind of a side question on this topic. Did you have a sit down with your wife and discuss this before going through it, or were you already talking about it for, weeks and weeks on end before that, or how did that conversation with your wife go?
I definitely sit down and talk with my wife. I mean, we're we talk a lot, which I think's key to a good marriage. I think it was a little easier for us because my wife's an Army brat, so her dad's a retired Army sergeant major. So she knew the drill, if you will. I mean, she'd been we always joke, say, hey, you've had an ID card for your entire life. So she understood the military. She's a very independent woman, very supportive. I mean, I forget how many deployments I've done, but she handles her business. But we talked about it, and she's very like, hey, if you're done, you're done. But we definitely talked about it. So, because there is a great deal of preparation, not only on the service members side with, going to do your VA appointments and doing all of that fun stuff, but family has to get ready. Whether you're moving to a new location or you're not, there is a big transition period just personally and for your family's perspective. So we definitely had that talk. And, but I think, the fact that she was an Army brat gave us, a little bit of a head start. So I think it's even more critical for anybody transitioning if their wife's, not familiar with the military, but if they're transitioning, at least retiring, they've been familiar with the military for 20 years. But if you're transitioning and your spouse isn't, you're just transitioning after 5 years, you still need to have that conversation.
Yeah, that's one of the things we try to capture and try to figure out. And as far as that transition process goes, I'm guessing that TAP wasn't around when you transitioned. I think it was like more in the Army, we call it ACAP.
Yeah, I went through TAP class.
Oh, you did?
Uh, I did. I went through tap
Okay.
class, you know, just in full transparency. I didn't find it real valuable back when I went through. Uh, and I've heard that, from a lot of other service members. They may have changed it. They may have really enhanced it since, over the last, you know, wow, that's 14 years now. I'm sure they have. But whenever I went through, it almost felt like, the military was kind of checking the box. Hey, we've got to, kind of give these folks at least a little bit of awareness of what to expect. So, you know, it wasn't real comprehensive. So it was a little bit more of figure it out for yourself.
If you could, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's pretty, you get out of it what you try to take away from. Plus it's a fire hose of information, or at
Yeah.
least it is now. I don't know if it was back then as well.
One thing that I did, I know you didn't ask this question, but it comes up with the tap conversation is, I had somebody mention to me that, kind of try to connect with a leader in your community, so I sent emails to like several business leaders in Tampa, just cold called. I mean, cold emails, just found their emails and emailed them and basically said, hey, could I get 30 minutes of your time? I'm about to transition and I'm not looking for a job. I'm not selling anything. I'm just a military person who's fixing to transition out of the military. And, I'd love to get your advice and just, hear what you think about, from the other side. What are possibilities for me? And I sent probably 7 or 8 emails to folks that I thought might be interested in. Like I was really interested when I got out of the military of going into sports management. So I mean, I sent an email to the athletic director of the University of South Florida and the University of Tampa and the VP of operations at the Tampa Bay Bucks and like the facility director at the Tampa Bay Lightning, somebody in the Tampa Bay Rays organization, just out of the blue, hey, I'm transitioning. I'm interested in this industry. I'm not looking for a job. Could I get 30 minutes of your time? And all but one responded and gave me 30 minutes of their time. And many of those turned into 45 minutes and 60-minute meetings. And every one of those meetings that I had turned into another meeting. Oh man, you should talk to so and so. You should talk to so and so. And although I didn't end up in the sports industry, it really gave me things that I'd never, ever thought about to consider and directions, possibilities that, I never knew about because I was in the military, not in industry. And so it was really valuable.
Was there anything in any of those emails that you sent out that you felt was like the kind of the selling point that allowed them to say yes, or maybe it was just the right time and right place, or just the fact that you reached out and said, hey, I'm not asking for a job, or I'm not trying to ask you for anything, and just want to see if you can give me 30 minutes of your time so we can sit down and chat? Like, was there anything that you specifically crafted in those emails that kind of marketed it in a way that they actually took the bait and signed on?
I think it was exactly what you just said. I'm not asking you for anything other than 30 minutes of your time. I mean, because most people out there, they're busy, but you say, hey, I'm a military veteran. I'm retiring, transitioning into the civilian space, really trying to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. I'm interested in your industry, but I don't know what your industry really entails. And I think that really was the, hey, how can I? And then people read it and they're like, okay, this guy's he's not asking me for anything. He says that up front. And people want to help other people. I think people are genuinely good and want to help people. And I think that's really it. And people like to talk about their industry. Oh, this guy's interested in the sports industry. Wow, you know, I'm a leader in the sports industry. Maybe I can help this guy. So I think you hit it perfectly is just you're not asking for anything other than a little bit of their time and you'd be surprised what happens.
Yeah, I've had varying experience with it, and ask asking a bunch of other people about it and trying to figure out like this magical potion, which there is no magical potion, to be able to figure out how to build a network and at the same time potentially find mentorship or a mentor along the way if that's part of the plan. So yeah, it's you would think now it's a lot easier because everybody's always on, has instant messaging. They're on LinkedIn, they're on different social media sites, and you can just DM them and send them a a quick message. But it's actually a little bit harder now.
Yeah.
And people are protecting their emails because they don't want spam and all this other stuff, which we still had back then. But yeah, I think it's really just being upfront, honest, straightforward, letting somebody know up front. And if you can, potentially for the audience, of course, for you listening out there, if you can do something to add value to the conversation or add value to the interaction, definitely lead with that as well, right? I mean, it's you said it exactly. Like, you're talking to somebody about their industry and they're the expert at their industry because they're at the top of their game in their industry. So you're basically just playing to their ego a little bit, in sort of an indirect way, but that part of it. But yeah, people definitely want to talk about what they know best, and people like to let other people know how good they are at what they do. So definitely a way to get in. But also, if you can, just to try to add value to the conversation, or if there's something you can offer, not as kind of a transactional thing, but more of just an offer of an offering of peace, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, 100% agree. I also used, I don't know if they still have it. There's an organization called American Corporate Partners,
Mm-hmm.
ACP, and I went through their program. And, I thought it was amazing. I really had a positive experience, because at the same time, part of me wanted to do sports management, and my background in the military is kind of logistics and financial management. So, there was part of me that says, hey, maybe I ought to go get my Series 7, kind of financial advisor license and certification, and go work for, I don't know, Merrill Lynch or JP Morgan or whatever. And so that program connected me with a guy that worked for Wells Fargo, and we talked about once a week for several months, and he was a really great advisor and teaching me, reviewing my resume and putting it into English, and like a lot of these services do these days, and really just when you're out of the military, you don't know how to negotiate a job offer. And he was just like, hey, man, everything's negotiable, period. Everything. And I was like, what do you mean everything's negotiable? And he's like, everything is negotiable. And I was just like, and that's uncomfortable. That's uncomfortable for military people. You get orders and you say, yes, sir, we're gone, forward march. And so it was really eye opening. So, if you can get into one of those programs, I know they're out there. I don't know. I'm not tracking all the available programs, but I think a lot of those provide real value to transitioning military members.
Yeah, we actually, I say we don't really work with them. I've reached out to them because of my interaction with them personally and said, hey, can you send some people over our way so we can do some interviews and do some kind of deep dives on some topics, Hire Heroes USA specifically. ACP is definitely an organization. I'm enrolled in their program currently, so I'm going through it. I'm about 4 months in, I guess, and they do regular email checkups, not only through the mentor that they connect you with, but also through the person who connects you with that mentor. They also reach out and want to get updates and understand how the process is going so that they can track everything and make sure that they're providing the right service. But yeah, it's incredible. You give them basically a short kind of bulleted list of what you're looking for, what you're trying to achieve, what you want to do, what kind of industry you want to break into or get in contact with. And then they sift through their, thousands of people in their database who are industry leaders across. Wells Fargo is a great organization. I've heard not just from you about this particular instance, but Wells Fargo in general. I've heard many, many good things about Wells Fargo and their interaction with veterans and their interaction with getting people hired, and they go to a lot of hiring events as well. So yeah, we're always looking to get someone from any of these other organizations on to talk about what they want to talk about. And it goes back to that thing of getting 30 minutes of their time so that they can tell us all about their expertise or what they do or what they provide to the military. But yeah, ACP is definitely a great one. And if all goes well, I'm going to be meeting up with some of their folks in Atlanta, hopefully around the end of the year sometime. So we'll see how
Awesome.
that happens. Let me backtrack just 2 seconds and talk about the TAP process. Was there anything specifically in the TAP process that was profoundly helpful to you or provided a really good insight? I know it was probably early on in the process. So yes, they've been developing it over the years, making it better, and expanded it to make it a DoD process and not just an individual service process. So it's all encompassing DoD kind of TAP process. But was there anything that stuck out that was really, really useful that you walked away with?
I mean, I think the documentation really, that they provided kind of provided us, they give you that checklist, the pretty, hey, you need to do A, B, C, medical and transition and final performance reports and all the different things. I think was probably the most valuable thing that I had, because you walk into TAP and, you go into your transition process and you're like, okay, we're going to make the transition. We're going to retire from the military or just transition out. And, it's kind of your magic word. Hey, we're getting out, well, that's a big word, it's, hey, we're getting out. What exactly does that mean? And what exactly does that entail? And, if you've been in the military for, 2 decades or more, there's a lot to it. And it's not all intuitive, I mean, yeah, you got to get your final performance report and you've got to, turn over your job and all of that stuff. But there's a whole lot else to it between all your A things and appointments. And that's a process in itself. And then, the survivor's benefit plan, and there's a whole thing to that, and all these big decisions that you need to make. And one of the big ones is, I think that's not stressed enough, and maybe it is now, but it definitely wasn't stressed enough whenever we got out, is doing a budget. I tell all the veterans that get out is, have you done a budget? I mean, you really, really, really need to do, at least a 30 to 60 day budget before you get out, to figure out, you know, what your monthly, requirement is. And that's going to really dictate what you can do on the other side of your transition. So, and that wasn't stressed at all at TAP, but the most important thing, I'm getting off track here, I apologize, was that kind of that checklist, really.
Yeah, no, you actually hit a really good point. The checklist for sure is a good thing to have in either way, right? Whether you're doing it on your own or whether somebody's providing you a checklist, like that's what one of the things we're trying to put together is an all-encompassing, and it's hard to do that because there's so many variables across the services. There's so many variables across different states, people that are transitioning out in Europe or other places. So it's kind of hard to just wrangle that all in and make an all-encompassing checklist. We're definitely trying to do something like that. But yeah, it's super tough. But the financial planning part that you bring up, I think they stress it a little bit more today. But I absolutely 100% agree, and I would ask, were you able to, or if you want to discuss it, were you able to put yourself in a position where you were pretty much debt free or close to debt free before transitioning out? Because one of the things that I like to tell people, and it's one of the things that I did before I got out, what probably the best thing that I did before I got out of the military, or at least after getting out, closely after that, was basically eliminating all debts, getting rid of all the extra fluff money that was going out and trying to minimize my costs because I wanted to live at a bare minimum with my retirement check. And then if anything comes on top of that, like that's extra money that's there and available to use. But I really want to minimize it down and be able to streamline my life so that I can actually, if I had to, just live off the retirement check, knowing that I could potentially get a job and maybe take out 401k or whatever I need to do. But Anything like that that crossed your mind, or were you thinking about that when you were retiring?
Definitely thinking about that when we're retired for sure. I mean, it gets to, my wife and I taught a, it's called Financial Peace University. It's a Dave Ramsey course at our church for probably 5 or 6 years. So we were both very attuned to try to, live either a debt free or a very, very limited debt type of lifestyle. So we weren't debt free when we retired, but we did do, kind of a 90-day budget prior to retiring, really trying to track, okay, because like I said, if you know exactly what you need, that's gonna, and hey, my retirement covers exactly what we need. So then I can go, if your monthly requirements are covered by your retirement, then you can do whatever you want. You can write books, you can become an artist. I mean, you hate to say this, you can become a school teacher because school teachers don't make near enough what they should these days. But you can do whatever you want. But if you don't know what you need, then you really don't know what you need to make. So for us, we did that. We knew that, we didn't need to make a ton, but we also wanted to really provide, a good future for our kids. So, that's kind of drove our decision to try to get in and really get a good job and go forward. But we did go through the process to get debt free post retirement. And so probably 4 or 5 years, we were in that process when we retired, but it was probably 4 or 5 years after we retired before we got completely debt free. And like you said, I mean, that's a game changer. I mean, when you wake up in the morning, you don't owe anything to anybody. You really can't, unless you woke up in the morning and got your coffee and owned that fact for yourself. It's hard to really explain the feeling that you have. It's a pretty empowering feeling. Like, I can do whatever I want. I don't owe anybody anything. Nobody's, you know, holding something over my head. It's just pretty empowering. So I would recommend that. It changed our lives. It changed our lives.
Yeah, and I guess it seems like a really, really far off in the distance. You said 5 years. It's pretty fast uh, for anybody's standards.
We've been working on it
No
for years
matter,
before that. So it was 5 years after I
right,
retired, but we've been working on it. It wasn't 5 years total, trust me.
right. So it wasn't an overnight success.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that people don't take into account. Like it takes time, but if you work on it every single day, the more days you work on it, the less time it takes. If that makes any sense at all, it just you shrink the timeline by doing the daily work. Basically, is what it boils down to. For me, it wasn't really doing the daily work for years and years. I guess mentally thinking about it, trying to do things here and there. But when I really focused in on it, like within a matter of a few months, I literally just cut this debt off, cut this debt off, cut this debt off, and then everything was gone. And I was like, okay, cool. Now I can live my life exactly the way I want to live my life, regardless of what happens. Like the only catastrophe that can stop me from doing that would be the government shutting down completely and my retirement check going away. But if that happens, I think we've got bigger issues to worry about.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That reminds me of a book real quick. I'll plug a book that I just read that just really, it's called The Slight Edge. It's a really good book about, uh, just like you said, just taking that one small action every day, and then the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day. And then before you know it, you know, in a month, in a year, in 2 years, you look back and you're like, man, I have transformed this area of my life or this habit of my life or whatever. It's just a really good book that I can't recommend enough. That just talks about the power of persistence and building habits, positive, successful habits.
Yeah, along the same lines, since you opened it up, are there any other books that you would potentially give, or if there's a book that you've given out the most as a gift to anybody, or one particular book, And you can go, 1, 3, 5, 7, as many books as you want to mention, because I personally love books. I read books all the time. So, but if there's any that stick out in your mind as being like that besides this book that you just mentioned, is there a book that you've read throughout your life that kind of stood out above all the other books?
There's two books that I've read multiple times that, one is, I think it's In Love and War. It's the story of James Stockdale whenever he was POW, and his wife Sybil and the vice admiral. It's his period of, whenever he was in the Hanoi Hilton, and he writes a chapter and she writes a chapter. And it's really, I mean, I've read it 2 or 3 times, and it's just one of those books you're just like, man, I mean, this guy, just an American hero. It's pretty powerful. And then I just read this book recently, and this book, the author is a guy named Ryan Holiday, and his book is Stillness is the Key. He has a bunch of books. He has Stillness is the Key. He has a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And he's kind of a stoic. He likes the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius and Epicurus and Seneca and those type of philosophers, Socrates. But he has those, he has a trio of books. The Obstacle is the Way, Stillness is the Key, and Ego is the Enemy. Those 3 books that Ryan Holiday wrote are all just absolutely amazing. My favorite is Stillness is the Key, and it just really gets to the point where you are your most effective when you take time to. A lot of people meditate, a lot of people go for a walk, a lot of people do yoga. There's different ways that people get to a place where they have kind of that inner peace, and when you're able to achieve that, that stillness, he calls it, that's when you can operate at your most effectiveness. You can make your best decisions, you're most efficient and productive, and be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, thank you for that. All of those are really, really great books. I haven't actually read the Stockdale book yet. I need to add that to my reading list, but I'm reading like 2 books right now that are multiple hundreds of pages. So I'm trying to get through those so I can move on to another 2 or 3 books. But yeah, Ryan Holiday is one of my heroes, actually.
Yeah.
I've read pretty much all his books. There's one book in particular that I actually incorporated in my daily routine in the mornings. It's called The Daily Stoic, and it's basically 1 page a day of all of that stuff that he talks about in the other books, and kind of condensed down into a nice, simple page. It sets the tone of my day, and I've come to realize over the years of reading it, after I've been reading it for however many years it's been out, the days that I don't read it in the morning and then I go back and revisit it and read it at night before I go to bed, I'm like, you know what, that piece of advice really, really could have helped me today. But
yeah, I love Ryan Holiday. There's so many, Atomic Habits, just so many good books. I just love, my wife and I just finished the 75 Hard Challenge. And one of the aspects of the 75 Hard Challenge is get back into reading. You got to read like 15 minutes and 15 pages a day. So it really re-energized our reading habit. And it just really, really, helped us kind of, get back into putting reading as a daily reading as a priority.
And for those who might not know, what exactly is the 75 Hard Challenge? Like, what's kind of the premise of it?
It's a kind of a mental toughness exercise. So it's 75 days of no alcohol. You have to follow some type of diet. You have to drink a gallon of water every day. You have to read 10 pages of a nonfiction book every day, and you have to do 2 45-minute workouts a day. One of them has to be outside. They can't be back to back. They have to be at least 3 hours apart, and you have to take a daily progress picture. And, it's not a physical challenge by any stretch, so I'd get up and walk my wife's a big runner, so she would run. And then, we'd do that first thing in the morning, like I said previously. And then maybe sometime mid-afternoon, we would go to the gym and work out. I think, but if you miss any one of those factors, you have to start over. So if you go to bed and you don't take your progress picture, you got to start over day one. And or if you don't drink 128 ounces of water, you got to start over. And so it really becomes a time management and mental discipline type of program. And it was a great Kickstarter for the New Year's. I think we're going to do it every January 1st because by the end, you realize how important it is to drink enough water every day and how awesome it is to, if you do drink alcohol, to take almost a 3-month break off of alcohol, and you sleep better, your skin looks better, you feel better. And to read, I mean, I think we chewed through like 3 or 4 books a piece in that 2.5 months, and it was awesome because so it was really good for us.
Is there anything that you would add to that program now that you've completed it once? Is there anything that you're like, if I added this in, this would be really interesting?
Man, I would love to do like a cold plunge, because I'm so curious about, that cold therapy. I hear so much about it. I haven't tried it yet. I live in a condo, so I don't have any place to kind of put the apparatus, but I would love to add that, just almost out of curiosity, because I've had a couple buddies that are like, oh my gosh, it's life changing. It's so good. It wakes you up. It resets you, all of this stuff. So that would be what I'd add.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you could almost get a similar effect. And of course, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on the internet. Everybody, for you out there listening, please do your own research. But you can get a similar effect by doing a cold shower, and you can actually just work your way up to it. So you can, at the end of the shower, turn it to cold, just slightly cold for, 10 seconds or 20 seconds, and gradually over time, just kind of increase the intensity of the cold and increase the duration of the cold. And you can get up to like 2 or 3 minutes of ice cold water coming from the shower head. So it's not an ice bath, but it does a lot of the same things that an ice plunge would do, and it's a little less intrusive on your mental state.
That's good advice.
Yeah. So try that out and let me know how that works and if it works for you. But I do that quite often, and it actually worked out in my favor one time because I was somewhere in an Airbnb and like the hot water went off for like 2 days and had zero hot water to take showers. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm used to this. It's fine.
I can do this.
No big deal. As far as transitioning out and transitioning to the civilian side, you've been out for about 11 years now, if
just over 11.
So I want to kind of zero in on the first 3 months, 6 months, the first year of transition out of the military, the mental processes, the self-talk. What kind of things did you experience in that first year, especially in the first couple months? To me is what I understand to be the most kind of critical time. But what were some of the mental conversations going on in your head, and what were you experiencing in that first year of transition?
That's a great question. I mean, I think for me, I retired on the 5th of April in 2013. And then, I had, my official retirement date was, I think, June 1st. And I had 90 days of terminal leave. I think for me, after I retired and quit going into the office, it was really, I won't say fear, but I was really nervous, like, hey, how is this going to play out? I mean, I had a pretty good idea that I was going to, become a federal contractor, a DoD contractor, but it was still kind of like, what do you mean I don't have to wear a uniform every day? And it was just kind of a weird, I don't know, fear, maybe apprehension's a better word. Just really kind of like an uneasy, you you have that first month where you're like, no work. This is awesome. I can do whatever I want. Uh, and then you start to go like, okay, I'm bored for starters. And then, okay, even if you have a job, you're like, okay, how's this going to work out? I don't know anything about doing this. And if you don't have a job, it's like, okay, what do I want to be when I grow up? So it was really awesome to begin with, that first, month or two. And then you kind of go like, okay, I had 4 kids, all, under the age of, you know, 15, so it was kind of like, okay, you gotta get serious, man. You got obligations and bills to pay and things like that. So there was some apprehension. And then I think, as it moved into, and I went to work on July 1st. So I was a full like 120 days. And then after I went to work, it was just really like being a one again, or, you're really starting over. Like, you don't know anything. For me, they wanted me to be a business development and sales guy, so one, I didn't know what business development and sales was, and two, I didn't want to be that greasy watch salesman. So you really you don't want your friends to be like, okay, here comes McGuire, turn the other way. So it was just a really weird balance, because for me, it was like a lot of guys just go in and they're like, hey, I'm an operational planner in the J5, and a DoD contractor will hire them, and you're going to be an operational planner in the J5. You retire on a Friday, you go to work on a Monday. And I completely get it. For me, I wanted a break, so I took 120 days off, and then they put me in a sales role. And for me, it was weird, because I'm very, very, very sensitive to, you know, maintaining my relationships and not being that guy that people go, oh man, damn that guy. But also, meeting expectations at work. So it was really, it took me the first year to kind of figure out what right looked like, where I could respect my relationships that I had with my comrades and my friends, and still kind of meet my expectations at work. So that first year for me was pretty, not dicey, but it took me a while to figure out exactly what was the right balance for me.
Yeah, and I have two follow-ons. In that first year, was there, I know you spoke about doing the cold emails to some organizations locally where you were and getting some time with them, which is actually super, super great advice for you out there listening in the audience. But was there any mentor that you leaned on in that first year, or anybody that gave you some mentorship advice along the way that then became readily available and useful in that first year that you were out?
I had two guys. One of those community leaders, excuse me, excuse me, quick glass of water here.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of those community leaders that I had originally reached out to, and we became friends. So we'd meet for lunch probably every month. And he was critical and let me bounce stuff on. And he was local to Tampa. He was an elderly gentleman and been a very successful businessman. And he was all he wanted to do was help. He had no job to offer me. He was retired. He had grown sons that were moved away, and he just kind of, hey, let's go have lunch. And I'd say, hey, this is who I'm talking to, and this is what I'm doing, and just allow me to bounce ideas off of him. And it was kind of like a grandfather figure to me. Just really said, hey, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? We war gamed stuff over lunch. And then my ACP mentor really, he said something to me that I thought was really good, and I still have it written on my whiteboard. He said, you want to be a businessman, not a man in business. And he said there's a very, very unique difference between the two. A businessman has accountability and integrity and honor and transparency and all of those things. A man in business can be anything, but you want to be a businessman. And I always thought that that was, in one sentence, you know, I was like, man, that's pretty good. So I tried to adopt that approach to whatever I'm doing. And so those are the two guys that really helped me that first year. I mean, the ACP guy was like helping me negotiate, learn about negotiation and all of that stuff. And the other gentleman was really helping me kind of more from an emotional perspective, like, hey, this is not, just take a deep breath, you know, you'll figure it out, and just help kind of war game situations.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I was also curious to know, because you mentioned your children were 15 and below at that time when you got out. And as we alluded to in the beginning, around that same time, 15, 16, 17, right in that age group, is when you got that epiphany and that spark of interest to join the service. Is there anything that you noticed or anything that your children may have mentioned to you since that time that they gleaned from that period of time in the family when you were transitioning and figuring it out and starting fresh, that they maybe picked up on and then took on their own as kind of like their motivation or um, their drive to do things a little bit differently than their peers?
That's a great question. Well, I think for us, I was also kind of during that period, probably the 2010 to the 2014 period. I had a couple of bouts of brain cancer during that period. So, probably to answer your question directly, no, because, you know, because there was just a lot going on in our lives that last, kind of 4 years of my career, last, 3 years of my active duty, and then 6 months after I retired in 2013, I had another recurrence. So it's been a year in treatment. So that last part of my career, and I misspoke. I think my oldest son was almost 18, so he was a little older. So 18 and below, not 15 and below, but really that last, group handful of years in the military was kind of a blur, to be perfectly honest with you, just from a health perspective. And we tried to protect all of our kids kind of from that part of my wife's life and my life. So we kind of sheltered them from that. And I think maybe in doing that, we kind of, protected them from, we kind of minimized the military lessons, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, so it's kind of that's a weird answer, but that's just kind of is what it is.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was at the end there. Did that affect like your VA rating or going through that whole I don't know if BDD was around then. I'm sure maybe in some form it was, but being able to apply for your benefits prior to exiting the military so that they start basically on the month after you get out or whatever. But um, going through the VA process and going through the VA benefits and things like that, how did that work with those complications that you experienced in that time frame?
It was for me, getting a VA rating wasn't very difficult, to be perfectly honest with you, because I had brain surgery in 2006 and had a fairly large portion of my uh, brain removed, and then had some pretty serious paralysis, after that, and that I was able to work through. And then in 2009, had a recurrence and spent all of 2010 on high dose chemo. And then had a recurrence in November of 2013, right after transitioning, retiring from the Navy. And then spent basically the first 8 weeks of 2014 on radiation and daily chemo. And then took a month off and spent the next 6 months on high dose chemo alone. So, I think I've had over 100 doses of chemo and 8 weeks of high intensity brain radiation and surgery. And so for me, I'm 100% disabled veteran, and it was pretty cut and dry, to be perfectly honest with you. I still go twice a month, or twice a month. Oh, thank goodness I don't do that. Twice a year to the Moffitt Cancer Center here in Tampa for full scans and things like that. So I still had to do all the requisite VA appointments for eye appointments and hearing appointments and all of that stuff. And there were other issues that I had to deal with that led to the 100% disabled veteran. But that part of it was pretty well documented, if you can imagine.
Yeah, certainly. I was just curious if there was any hiccups or anything along the way going through the VA process because of the circumstances, not because of, but that you experienced outside. But it sounds like it went pretty smooth and pretty
Just
pretty
scheduling appointments is always kind of a pain, with the VA. So it's just like I tell everybody they need to start, when I talk to people, I say, you need to start a year out. You really, once you make the decision to retire, you need to, if you think this is your last, duty station or your last command that you're going to be at, you need to try to start prepping to retire a year in advance, and that gives you time to do, like I said, a 60 or a 90-day budget. It gives you time to, submit your papers and get it back. It gives you time to plan a ceremony if you're going to have a ceremony, to schedule TAP, to schedule the VA appointments. There's just so much to make those contacts with the business leaders and have those conversations. And you want to do all that stuff and have most of it done, 60 days, 90 days before you actually transition. That way you exit. It's like getting to that debt free that you talked about, John. That way, when you get to that point, you're not just frenetic. You're like, okay, I'm stepping into a new chapter. You're not like running into a new chapter kind of stuff and stuff in your bag, when you're late for an air flight or something.
Yeah, be prepared, as the Boy Scout motto says. I think it's still called the Boy Scouts. It may be called something different now, but that's what it used to be. Is be prepared. Yeah, we generally tell people at least a year, if not more. Like, if you can start mentally 5 years out, or if you're at that last duty station, you've got 3 or 4 years at that duty station, like, and that's your last one. Like, you should start the minute you get on the ground. At least
that's
mentally,
great advice.
Like going through the process of what it looks like, the mental exercise at least, and then start taking action. Yeah, it's some people get to the point and they're in the last 60 days or 30 days before they actually finish complete service, their AFS, and they're like, okay, so what do I do now? Do I have to do this TAP thing? Like, what do I need to do for my VA thing? And we've seen it a few times, and we're like, hey, guy, you might want to start doing something because you're really, really short on time now. So
yeah, it reminds me about my trail, my walk here recently. I talked to one of my buddies, and he's kind of a mess. And I was like, so when did you do your pack? He missed all the planning calls. And I said, when did you do your packing? He goes, well, I finished packing last night at 1:30. At 1:30 a.m., I'm like, do what? And he's like, yeah, I got to the point where I was just shoving everything in my backpack, and I shoved everything in my backpack. And then whenever I couldn't zip it anymore, I knew that I was packed. And I'm like, do what? And then we got out there and he didn't have a water filter. And I'm like, we're out here in the middle of nowhere and you don't have a water filter. It's like, so he's completely dependent on everybody else. And I'm like, you've got to take time to be prepared, period, whether, regardless of what you're doing. So just so true.
Yeah. As much as I'd like to be a little bit envious of people who can do that last minute kind of thing and pull it off, I think I'd rather err on the side of at least a little bit of planning, at least a little bit of forethought before I do things like that.
100%.
Especially hiking the Appalachian Trail. So let me go ahead and touch this one real quick. And I alluded to it and talked about it and mentioned it in the beginning as we were talking. If there was a way you could go back and sit down and have, say, a 30-minute, say you sent yourself through space and time, through a time machine, an email to yourself at the age of 15 or 16, and you're like, hey, can I get on your schedule for 30 minutes just to sit down and talk? I'm not looking for a job. I'm not trying to give you advice. I don't want to give you stock tips. But I just want to sit down and have a chat with you. Where would that happen? Like what exact like physical place and time? And what are some of the things that you might discuss with your 16-year-old self?
I think it would happen on a remote campsite in the Appalachian Trail, with no cell phone connectivity whatsoever, where we could just have a uninterrupted, as focused eye to eye conversation as physically possible, where there's absolutely no distractions. And that can happen. You can make that happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be on a remote campsite in the Appalachian Trail. And then I guess what I would tell myself is to kind of think. You did it early before we got on this recording. You did something that I thought was really, really good. You're like, hey, let's start with the end in mind. Let's think about, what we want to accomplish in this podcast and start from there. And I thought that was a brilliant way to go about it. And I think I would give that advice to my 16-year-old self, would be like, what do you want to do? You don't have to have all the answers when you're 16 years old. You'll never do that. But what's the end goal? Hey, if it's to have to have a family and have healthy kids, that's awesome. If it's, hey, I want to be a millionaire, that's awesome. Hey, if I want to be, my lifelong goal is to be a doctor, that's awesome. But think about, because when you're young, you're thinking about like this far ahead of yourself. And that's just the way you're wired when you're 16 and 15. And I mean, that's just human nature. But if there was a way to talk to my 15 or 16-year-old self and say, hey, just take a minute and really, really think about and write down what you want to achieve in your life. And you can go back and revise it. You can change it maybe in 5 years, you can change it or whatever, make some life goals, I guess is what I'm saying. What's a 30-year goal? What's a 20-year goal? What's a 10-year goal? What's a 5-year goal? What's a 1-year goal? And be able to have the end in mind, have some waypoints, some checkpoints. Don't be afraid to give yourself some grace and adjust those goals. And if you need a 180 change course, then do it. You can reassess. But I think starting out with just some type of direction of what you do. And a lot of people, when they're 16, they're like, hey, I'm going to be a Navy pilot, period. Or my roommate at the Naval Academy had wanted to be a pilot, a jet pilot, since he was like 8. His dad took him to an air show and he was in love, and that's great because there are people like that. But I wasn't one of those people. I was like, hey, and like we said earlier, I visited my aunt on a boat in Annapolis and I was like, wow, this is awesome. Where would I be if I haven't made that trip in the summer? I mean, what would I be? Probably wouldn't be married to my wife and wouldn't have these kids and wouldn't be living here. Well, so it's just that one little thing that can change your life. But I think at least having, the structure of a plan early on, to kind of take that first step on your life journey would help a great deal.
Yeah, I always love listening to the answer to that question, every single time. I don't know why. It just always, it's always really good to hear, and it's variations of the answer. But yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. I do want to jump into a couple more, and I also want to be very respectful of your time. So, because we covered a lot, indirectly and directly, we covered a lot of these questions already. So,
Yeah, this is really fun. I'm completely enjoying it.
all right, let's do 2, maybe 3 more. If you had the opportunity, I know you're on social media, do a few things here and there. You've done business planning and I would hopefully imagine some marketing strategies at least, or something similar to that, coming from sales and things like that. If you had the opportunity on your platform and say we knew that the reach for a single post was going to be 1 million eyeballs, and you wanted to put a message out into the world in the form of a LinkedIn post, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like advice or a quote or something like that, but something that really, really deeply resonates with you, that you feel like the rest of the world needs to hear, and you know in this one post it's going to happen, and a lot of people are going to get eyeballs on it and see it and take it in. What would be that one thing that you would want to put out?
Wow, man, that's such a great question. I mean, I think for me, uh, I've got a strong faith, and I would want people to investigate, their faith and where they are, and I would want people to know that Jesus loves them, and I know that's unpopular in today's society, but if you ask me if there was something I want as many people in the world to realize that was out there, that they're loved, they are joyfully and wonderfully made, and that there is a creator in heaven above that loves them and wants them to succeed and be successful. And yeah, and they should investigate Jesus.
Yeah, not only the faith part of it, but if you've ever taken the time to sit down, I know you have, but if you've ever taken the time to sit down and actually read through the Bible, it's probably one of the top 10 philosophy books in the world as well. Not only being the story of Christ and the story of, the things that happened in the biblical times, but there's a ton of great nuggets of philosophy just captured inside of the Bible, just in that notion. So,
Oh goodness, it's just yeah, it's I love it. I love the Old Testament. Kind of, it's just you're exactly right. There's so much good advice in there, whether wherever you are. I mean, the Book of Proverbs is pretty amazing. It's just it's just wonderful. So, I mean, if you can take some time and just even if you just read Proverbs, I think you'll get a ton of value out of there for military veterans. Just not pushing anything, but it's changed my life. And if you do nothing else but just investigate the Book of Proverbs, I think you'll be better off for it.
yeah, I agree with 100%. I have a couple copies of it sitting around here on various bookshelves, and I'm not a religious person by any stretch of the imagination, but I do find the Old Testament Proverbs and many things sprinkled throughout the Bible to be very interestingly philosophically correct, in my opinion. So,
Agree with you.
okay. So if you were to sit in front of a classroom of people who are transitioning out, they could be just transitioning after a few years, they could be retiring after 20 or 30 years of service, and you were allotted, say, 20 minutes. So let's just make it within the boundaries of like a TED Talk kind of thing. What would be the main thesis of that talk? What would you want to convey to them?
I think what I would want to convey to people is to keep an open mind. I think in the military we get we live a very, very structured life. Um, we're told what to do, where to be, how to be dressed, how to do things, how to speak, all of the different things. I think if I was speaking in a transition seminar, I would really say, hey, let's keep an open mind. There's tons of possibilities for your future. You can do, my wife and I just started a small business. I mean, we became entrepreneurs. I never thought I would become an entrepreneur. So I think it would be just take a chance. Don't be afraid to take a chance. And I think that's the one thing that really in the military, it's very risk averse. It's zero tolerance. It's, hey, you made a mistake, you're being relieved of command, or hey, you did this and you're getting a bad fitness report or bad performance evaluation. And it just makes us in a lot of situations and a lot of services, it makes you very, very risk averse and focus strictly on security and structure. And I think, I would really emphasize, hey, keep an open mind and don't be afraid to take a chance because, you know, it could change your life.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Excellent advice. So as we're winding down, and again, like I said, I want to be very respectful of your time. Is there anything that we haven't talked about or anything that you may want to discuss or we can talk about that we haven't covered over the course of the interview so far?
Sure. I do want to talk about, our small business and not strictly as just a plug. Obviously I'd love to plug it, but the one thing that we discovered here recently, and I'd never heard, there's so many things when you're just, say a a regular person, you're not like one of these super successful business people or, Elon Musk or, whoever, Jeff Bezos or whatever that, we don't know about. And just, 3 years ago, my wife and I learned about something called a real estate syndication, which I had no idea. I never heard the term. And evidently, it's a pretty popular thing that people use. It's an alternative investment where people pool their money and buy apartment complexes or buy self-storage facilities or buy industrial buildings or buy strip malls. And we had actually never heard of it. And you're just like, first thing we said is this legal? What is this thing? And then as we got deeper and deeper into it, we found out not only is it legal, but it's very, very powerful. So, I mean, that's kind of why I was alluding to keep an open mind, because there's so many things out there that when you're in the military, you're focused on the daily grind, you're focused on getting ready for deployment, you're focused on supporting your family, you're focused on, getting a good performance evaluation and the mission. And then you get out and you're like, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you, like I said, keep an open mind, don't be afraid to take chances. And that's what led us into this business. And it's turned out to be, life changing for not only us, but, several of our friends and other military veterans and folks. So that would be the advice that I would give to people. And, I'd plug our business. It's Heart Soul Capital Partners, and that's what we do with real estate syndication. And it's been really fun from getting into becoming an entrepreneur and learning new things. And it's been exciting about educating, other veterans and family members about stuff that we don't typically hear about as regular everyday Americans, if you will.
Yeah, and if I could just pull the thread a little bit, if you could break down like what real estate syndication is for those who may not know, and in that breakdown, do you have to be an accredited investor, meaning what is it, the $1 million
Right.
threshold and certain amount of XYZ? Can you break that down for us real quick?
Sure. Well, a real estate syndication is basically just a partnership where people pool their money. So there's general partners, which would be like Victoria, my wife, and I, and we would operate. We pool all our money, and there's limited partners and people that are just investing and passive investors, that get, distribution checks, and they have no responsibility. They just invest and get their checks. And then there's general partners, and we operate, what we do is we invest in apartment complexes. So we'll pool the money, buy an apartment complex, and then basically we'll manage the apartment complex for 5 years with the property management company. We'll redo roofs and parking lots and renovate units and operate it like a business. So as we operate it like a business and we make more profit, those profits are dispersed to the passive investors. So there's different types of these investments. Not everybody has to be an accredited investor. There's different types of investments. There's something called the 506C, which requires somebody to be an accredited investor, which you're exactly right. It requires $1 million and some other requirements that folks need to meet. But there's also something called a 506B, which is kind of friends and families, and it's called sophisticated investors. So you do not have to be an accredited investor. So that's when, I get people involved, like, my little brother, or, several of my classmates at the Naval Academy, or golfing buddies, or neighbors, things like that. So it's an alternative investment that can be available to, everyday Americans and busy professionals that are just looking for some passive income that, most Americans have never even heard about. And it can be very, very powerful because, typically 6 to 9 months after you close on one of these deals, one of these investments, you start to get monthly checks. And that typically lasts for 4 to 5 years. And then that complex will sell. And a lot of times, over the course of, a 5-year period, you can actually double your money. So it can be a very, very powerful, and the tax advantages are also pretty powerful. So it can be, a really good alternative investment, something to diversify your portfolio. That's pretty exciting, that, we're super excited that we learned about, and trying to educate as many people as possible.
And is there anything that you've seen so far in your experience doing that, that people should be aware of or be on the lookout for, like any kind of red flags that people should be aware of?
Yeah, I think if they're interested in getting involved in one of these syndications, they need to really, really do some vetting on the people who are going to be operating the deals. So I mean, you need to spend some time, before we even add anybody to our database. It requires at least a couple, 2 or 3 conversations, so we can learn about not only the investor, what their goals are, what their objectives are. Are they at a good position financially in their lives to make an investment like this? And then we want them to get to know us. Hey, here's our background. Here's what we do. Here's our experience. And there needs to be at least a couple, 2 or 3 conversations where you really understand what a person's about. And then you get an idea of, hey, what's your experience? How many times have you done this? Have you ever been full cycle? Who else is involved in the deal? So I think you really need to be careful with kind of vetting your partner, if that's good advice, the experience level and what they're all about. Are your values aligned?
Yeah, that's actually a great one. Aligning values is a great way to create a great partnership / relationship / business deal, but it's also a great way to create enemies and crash and burn on the back end if your values don't align with the other person or the other organization. So that's really good advice on that one.
Great.
And the other thing I wanted to ask was, when you started the business, how much like legwork did you have to do? What was the kind of the point where you knew, okay, this is going to be a business that's going to be successful, like we're going to be able to do this and live off of this and use this? Because I asked that question because there's a lot of ways to start businesses. You can start up creating a product, you can start up creating software, you can do many various things to start a business. But was there a point where you knew, like, okay, this makes sense and it's actually going to work?
Great. Yeah, for sure. So, like a lot of military veterans, my wife and I, as we moved, we kind of collected rentals. You either go to a duty station. You're like, hey, we're going to buy this house and this is going to make a great rental. It's in a great location. It's right next to the base. We're going to rent this out. Or in other scenarios, you're like, hey, I just got orders. You need to be there in 30 days. And oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? So we had a couple experiences of each. So by the time we retired and we were a couple years into our kind of civilian corporate career, we probably had 5 or 6 single family rentals that, where they were all making $100 or 200 or even $300 a month. So good, passive income, but we were managing them all. And, when the toilet goes out or the roof needs to be replaced or whatever. And we had a couple instances in late, mid to late 22 where, we had a leak in one of the baths. The piping, it was an older home. The piping went underneath the master bedroom. So we had to rip up the floor, take a jackhammer to the slab to repair. And then we had to replace a roof on another one. And there goes all your money for not only for that unit for the year, and sometimes the whole portfolio for a couple of years. And it was like, there's got to be a better way. There absolutely has to be a better way. And my wife's been a residential real estate agent for probably 19 years now. So we knew the value that, the power of real estate, you can really build wealth via real estate. So we understood that. And we were like, there just has to be a better way where you can scale this. And so we joined a mastermind program to get some coaching. And I would recommend that folks, if you can get mentorship or coaching from somebody who's done what you want to do and kind of avoid those potholes and pitfalls and, get some coaching on, hey, this is the right way to do this. So we joined a mastermind group to really fine tune our skills on how to scale a business like that. And then we just, once we really were comfortable on that, we understood exactly what we were doing. We jumped in with both feet and started partnering with people to buy these apartment complexes. And it's turned out to be a great endeavor for us.
Yeah, I don't know which organization you've found to get that kind of mentorship and kind of coaching. There's many ones out there. If anybody's really, really interested, there's a interview I did with Military to Millionaire, Mr. Dave Ray. I'll link it up here somewhere in the top if you want to come check that out. Really great interview, really great guy. And he does a mastermind similar to what you're speaking of. And it's strictly military folks. He's a former USMC member as well. And he basically freed himself up and went debt free and made $1 million before he even got out of the military. So that was all through real estate. Now he's doing syndicated deals and things like that as well. So great guy, great organization.
It's a powerful tool.
Yeah, real estate is one of those things that pretty much is never going to go away in some shape or another shape. It's going to be there, whether that's Airbnb type rentals or whether that's syndicating entire, business complexes or something like that. Like there's always going to be a need for some kind of dwelling over your head, whether it's in a business setting or whether it's personal for your own family. So until we start to populate Mars, of course, and then things change. Cool. Well, that's all I have. I will give you back your time, and you, the listener out there, I will give you back your time as well. I hope you got something out of this. Just quickly before we wrap it up, is there any social media, LinkedIn or anything like that? And of course, your web address for your business as well that I could put in the show notes afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very active on LinkedIn, just Marvin McGuire. Also very active on Facebook. And our web address for our website is Hartzell, like your heart in your chest, SILL, capitalpartners.com. So www.hartzellcapitalpartners.com. You can also find us, you can find Hartzell Capital Partners on LinkedIn and Facebook, and just love to connect with people and have a couple of conversations if you're interested. I always say, hey, there's never any pressure or stress talking to me because just life's too short for that. And I know all about the delicacy of life. So I'm just easy come, easy go, man. So I really appreciate your time, John.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking time out. Thank you for being here with me. I have enjoyed this conversation tremendously. I'm glad I got to finally sit down and talk with you. I hope it spurs into a long-term friendship over the years. I hope that all of these do, but be glad to have you on again anytime in the future if we're doing something, or if we've got a live show and we're talking about business and real estate or something like that. Maybe something where you could fit in there. We'd love to have you back on there and do that. But yeah, thank you very much for taking your time out today with us.
Yeah, I've really loved it, man. I've really loved it. If there's anything I can ever do for you, please do not hesitate to ask, because this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I try to make it as value add as I can for the person on the other end. So to use my own words and to take action on my own words that I said earlier, always try to provide value and provide value out to the audience as well, for you listening at home or in your car or on your trail run. Hopefully on the podcast, you can find us everywhere on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, a multitude of other places, and also on Reads Across America Radio on Wednesday evenings. So check us out there. The only ask for you in the audience is, if you enjoyed what we're doing and you find it valuable and useful to you, if you can hit the like, subscribe, share, all those buttons, just click them all. It's fine. Just click them all. Even the one that says don't like, that's fine too. Just click whatever you want to click. Click all the things. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for being with us here. And thank you, Marvin, for being with us on the show. And we will talk to you all later.
Yes, sir. Thanks for your time.